Do you think the problems we face today are new? The endless divisions in society, the corruption, immorality, and confusion even about what truth is. Do you think we are the first generation to deal with scandals in leadership, broken relationships, greed, and even spiritual emptiness? Think again. Hi everyone, I'm Ashish, and today I want to take you on a quick journey into one of the most fascinating letters of the New Testament. But before that, let me ask you, if you were a Christian in the first century, where would you want to live? Maybe in Jerusalem, close to the roots of our faith, right? I know. But now imagine instead you live in Corinth. Corinth was a famous and important city in Paul's time. The name Corinthos in Greek means ornament. It was built on a mountain called Corinth, about 1800 feet above the harbor. Because of its position, it became very prominent and rich because of its trade. History tells us that in 146 BCE, the Romans destroyed the city. For about 100 years, it stayed in ruins. But in 46 BCE, Julius Caesar rebuilt it and turned it into a Roman colony. Soon it became the capital of Roman province of Achaia and home of the Roman governor. The government and the laws were in Latin, but people spoke Greek in their daily life. But now Corinth was not only a political center, it was also a cultural center. Albert Brains point out that it became famous for its games. These games include running, wrestling, boxing, even music and poetry competition. Corinth was also known for art, painting and sculptures. But Corinth also had a very dark side. Paul T. Butler calls it a city of wealth, luxury and immorality. The temple of Aphrodite had about 1,000 prostitutes. People openly practiced drunkenness, fornication, homosexuality, robbery and other sins. To live like a Corinthian basically means to live a sinful life. Into that city, as Acts 18 tells us, Paul came during his second missionary journey. He stayed there for 18 months, working with Priscilla and Aquila, and started the church. Later, when Paul was in Ephesus on his third missionary journey, he heard reports about serious problem in that church. That's when he wrote the letter we call 1 Corinthians. So who wrote this letter? The answer is straightforward, Paul. But let me explain why. Raymond Brown emphasizes that there is no serious disagreement among scholars about Pauline authorship. Harms Hollander goes further, listing it among the 7 authentic letters of Paul. This shows a strong scholarly agreement. The letter itself also supports this. Right at the beginning, Paul names himself and Sosthenes in chapter 1 verse 1. Throughout the letter, he speaks personally in first person, either singular or plural. Mentions the people he baptized, his own celibacy, his Jewish background, his travels, and even his past as the persecutor of the church. Simon Kastemacher observes that these details fit exactly what we know about Paul from Acts and also in his own writings. Not only that, the style of the letter, greeting, thanksgiving, teaching, correction, and blessing, is the same pattern we see in Paul's other letters too. And when we move outside the text, the early church fathers confirm the same thing. Around 96 CE, Clement of Rome urged the Corinthians to remember the letter Paul once had wrote to them. Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp, Tertullian also quoted from it often. So Carson and Moore points out that these early witnesses never questioned the Paul's authorship or Pauline authorship. Manuscripts like Papyrus 46, Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Alexandrinus further confirms this. So when we connect the internal and external evidences, the picture becomes very clear. The letter to the Corinth is genuinely written by Paul, and both the text itself and church history stand together to support it. Once we know Paul wrote the letter, the next question is when? Here again, Acts gives us an important clue. In Acts 18, Paul is brought before Gallio, the governor of Achaia. Archaeologists later discovered an inscription at Delphi that dates Gallio's rule to 51 to 52 CE. This presents Paul's time in Corinth. After leaving Corinth, Paul eventually spent 3 years in Ephesus during his third missionary journey, sometime between 54 and 57 CE. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 16 verse 8, Paul himself says he is writing from Ephesus and that he will stay until Pentecost. That small details narrows the timeline. When we put all these evidence together, scholars like Garrison and Moo and Louis Berkhoff all agree that the most likely date of writing is around 55 or 56 CE. So the letter did not come from speculations or imagination. It came from a very real time and place in Paul's ministry. But why did Paul feel the need to write? What was happening in Corinth? Thomas Lee explains that to understand any letter, we must look at its occasion. In Corinth, the situation was urgent. The church was divided. Some followed Paul, others Apollos, and others Peter. There were cases of immorality, dispute over marriage, food offered to idols, confusion in worship, spiritual gifts, and even the resurrection. Joseph Wismer says Paul learned these problems through reports from Chloe's household, a letter from the Corinthians, and visits from his followers. They even asked Apollos to return, showing how deep the division was. Mark Taylor adds that Paul had already written them an earlier letter, but now we lost, warning them not to associate with immoral people. But that letter was misunderstood, so Paul wrote again clearly in 1 Corinthians. David Garland describes this letter as a substitute presence of Paul. Since he could not be there with them, the letter became his way of guiding and correcting them from a distance. So the occasion came from reports, letters, and visits that exposed the church's struggles, which Paul answered in 1 Corinthians. But the purpose of the letter flows from its occasion. As Donald Guthrie says, the purpose of any letter arises from its occasion. Paul's main goal was to correct the church, restore unity, and guide believers towards maturity. Joseph Wismer says Paul wanted order and unity. He reminded them that the gospel is centered on the cross of Christ, which may look foolish to the world, but is God's true wisdom and power. Paul T. Butler points out that Paul dealt with many problems like immorality, misuse of freedom, disorder in worship, confusion about spiritual gifts, and doubts about the resurrection. His aim was not only to correct, but also to help them grow in faith. And also, Louis Berkhoff highlights two purposes. Paul wanted to stop the divisions in the church and to give practical teachings so that they could resist the temptations and live faithfully. His approach was pastoral, guiding them patiently towards a stronger Christian life. So Paul's purpose was clear: to heal the church, correct the sins, and lead the Corinthians into the unity and maturity in Christ. So, as I said in the beginning, the problem we face in today's Christendom are not new. Division, immorality, corruption, confusion about truth, all these same struggles were there in Corinth 2000 years ago. And that is exactly why Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. He wanted the church to stay united, to live faithfully, and grow in maturity through Christ. And the truth is, his message is still the same for us today. In a world full of same struggles, we are called to stand firm in the gospel, live in unity, and find our hope and strength in Christ. The struggles are same, but so is the answer. Christ is still enough. Shalom.